What kind of person gives away every single dollar they own, not because they lost a bet, not because they were tricked, but because they chose to? Sounds insane, right? Most of us wouldn't even give up a $10 bill without asking, "What's in it for me?" But Daniel gave away everything. His house, his savings, even the last $20 bill in his wallet. Why? That's where the story gets interesting. Because while the world laughed at him, while people whispered that he'd gone mad, something started to shift. And by the time they noticed, Daniel had already written a new chapter in his life. One that didn't just make him rich again, it made him unforgettable. So stick around, because this isn't just a story about money. It's a story about meaning. And trust me, the twist? You won't see it coming. Daniel wasn't the kind of guy you'd notice in a crowd. He didn't wear flashy suits or drive a car that hummed like money. He wore the same watch for 12 years, not because it was vintage, but because he didn't see the point in replacing something that still ticked. Born and raised in a small Midwestern town, Daniel was the type who held doors open for strangers and always tipped the pizza guy more than he probably should have. He grew up in a modest home with parents who didn't talk much about money. They talked about doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. That kind of upbringing sticks to your soul. He wasn't rich by birth, not even close. He worked his way up from selling printer ink door to door to eventually building a small but thriving logistics company. Nothing fancy, no IPO, no headlines, just honest growth and long nights fueled by coffee and YouTube tutorials. Daniel was comfortable, and to him, that was enough. But deep down, he felt something missing, something unshakable. A quiet voice that whispered, "Is this really it?" He laughed a lot, sometimes at the wrong time, and he had this annoying habit of answering questions with more questions, like some kind of philosopher who binge-watched TED Talks. But underneath all that quirkiness, Daniel had a compass, not a physical one, but a moral one, and it always pointed him toward compassion. The problem? Compassion rarely pays the bills, or so he thought. It all started with a funeral. A former client of Daniel's had passed away, a man worth millions. The room was full of stiff suits and shallow handshakes, people who showed up not to grieve, but to be seen. Daniel sat quietly in the back, watching the slideshow of a man's life reduced to golf trophies, business meetings, and vacations he probably never enjoyed. Not one person stood up to share a genuine story. Not one tear felt real. On the drive home, Daniel couldn't shake this feeling, like he was staring into a mirror of his own future. What if that was him someday? Rich, sure, but remembered by no one who truly knew him. That night, Daniel sat alone in his kitchen, staring at a glass of water like it held the answers. And then it hit him. Not a voice from the sky, not a midlife crisis breakdown, just a quiet moment of clarity. I've spent years building a life that only exists on paper, he thought. What if the real return on investment was what I gave away? He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he made a list, not of things he wanted, but people who needed help. A waitress at the diner whose kid was in the hospital. A mechanic who fixed Daniel's truck for free once during a snowstorm. A single mom down the street whose lights kept getting cut off. Over the next few weeks, Daniel began liquidating his savings, selling off parts of his business, even giving away his car. Not because he had a breakdown, but because, finally, he felt awake. Friends thought he was joking. Family called interventions. One cousin texted, "Are you high or just hacked?" But Daniel smiled through all of it. He wasn't trying to go viral or make a statement. He just wanted to see what would happen if someone gave without expecting anything back. And that was the beginning of everything. At first, people thought it was a phase. A quirky rich guy trying to find meaning, like those people who go backpacking in Bali and post about inner peace from infinity pools. But when Daniel gave away his final $5,000 to a stranger who needed surgery for his daughter, reality sank in. He was serious. His phone started ringing less. Texts went unanswered. His business partners held an emergency meeting, not to help him, but to remove him. They thought he was mentally unstable, a liability. His parents, heartbroken and confused, begged him to stop. "This isn't generosity, Daniel," his mother cried. It's madness. Even his closest friend, a guy who once said Daniel was the most grounded person he knew, called him a fool. The world doesn't work like that, he warned. You can't just throw money at problems and expect it to fix your soul. But Daniel wasn't trying to fix anything. He wasn't looking for praise. He just believed, stubbornly, maybe foolishly, that giving was the only thing that made sense anymore. That the world could use a little more irrational kindness. The world, however, was not kind in return. Without money, people stopped returning his calls. Clients disappeared. The smiles he used to get in coffee shops were replaced with pity or discomfort. He sold his house and moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a rundown bakery. Most nights, dinner was instant noodles and tap water. No more wine nights. No more brunch invites. The same people who once admired his success mindset now whispered behind his back like he'd lost his grip on reality. He started to doubt himself. Not out loud, but quietly during those 2 a.m. nights when the silence of the world felt heavier than any debt. Had he gone too far? Had he really traded stability for some vague feeling of purpose? But even in the isolation, there were moments. Moments when a single thank you letter would arrive in the mail. Or a stranger he helped months ago would call just to say, "You saved my family." Those small flickers of light kept him going, even when the darkness felt like it might swallow him whole. The first few months were brutal. Daniel went from leather chairs and catered meetings to a creaky mattress above a bakery that smelled like burnt dough by noon. His mornings started with instant coffee he had to stir with a fork because he couldn't afford spoons, and yes, that's a real thing. He took odd jobs, stacking shelves, sweeping sidewalks, helping the bakery downstairs with early deliveries just to afford rent. Sometimes he'd sit on park benches, watching the world rush past him, wondering if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. But something unexpected started to happen. He began sleeping better. Not because his bed was comfortable, it wasn't, but because his mind was finally quiet. No inbox buzzing. No contracts hanging over his head. Just stillness. It was as if, for the first time in years, Daniel could hear his own thoughts again. And they weren't yelling at him. They were calm. Strangers started recognizing him. Not from newspapers or LinkedIn, from the impact he left behind. The waitress whose son needed surgery? She now ran a small food truck and gave Daniel free meals without asking. The mechanic from the snowstorm? He dropped off warm gloves and boots at Daniel's door anonymously, but Daniel knew who it was. The single mom whose lights kept getting cut off? Her kid drew Daniel a picture that read, "You're our hero." He kept that one taped to his wall. Sure, the days were tough. There were times when hunger gnawed, when isolation stung, when self-doubt crept back in like mold. But alongside the pain was peace. Not the kind you buy with a vacation or a weekend detox, the kind that comes from living in alignment with your values, even when no one's watching. And every now and then, Daniel would get this look from people, not pity, but something else. A softness. Like they could see something in him they were missing in themselves. Something quietly brave. He was still poor by society standards, but somehow he had never felt richer. It was a Tuesday, cold, gray, and raining sideways, when everything changed. Daniel was stacking empty bread trays behind the bakery when a black SUV pulled up to the curb. It didn't fit the street. Too clean. Too expensive. The window rolled down slowly, and for a moment, Daniel thought someone was just lost. But then a voice called out, soft, steady, familiar. Daniel. He turned, squinting through the rain. A man stepped out, early 30s, crisp-tailored coat, expensive shoes that clearly weren't meant for puddles. And then Daniel remembered. His name was Elijah, a quiet kid Daniel had met years ago during a mentorship program. Back then, Elijah had been barely surviving, broke, father in jail, working night shifts just to afford community college. Daniel had stayed after one of the sessions, just to listen. Then he wrote him a check to cover a semester's tuition and told him, "The world doesn't owe you anything, but it does respond to people who don't give up." Elijah never forgot that. "I've been looking for you," Elijah said, stepping forward. "You gave me a shot when no one else would. That check? That time you spent with me? It changed everything." Turns out, Elijah had gone on to build a tech company. a big one. He wasn't just doing well, he was thriving. And he hadn't come to thank Daniel with words. He came with action. I want to invest in you, Daniel. Not because you need it, but because you deserve it. You gave without asking, now let someone give back. Daniel didn't say anything for a moment. He just stared, water dripping from his hood, trying to process what life had just thrown at him. It wasn't the money that shook him, it was the full circle moment. That quiet confirmation that maybe, just maybe, the universe was always watching. Elijah offered him a position on his foundation's board to help identify people worth betting on, the way Daniel had bet on him. A stable income, a real place to live, and a chance to do what Daniel loved most, give. The moment wasn't flashy. No music swelled, no dramatic hug. Just two people, standing in the rain, understanding something that couldn't be explained. Daniel said yes. Daniel didn't become rich overnight. No lottery ticket, no hidden inheritance, no viral fame. What happened was far more powerful. People he had once lifted reached back. Slowly, steadily, almost quietly, the seeds he had planted began to bloom. Elijah wasn't the only one. A woman he had helped pay for night school years ago reached out to offer him a consulting role at her HR firm. Another man he once helped during an eviction crisis brought him into a real estate co-op project. None of them owed him anything, and yet they chose to return the kindness he gave when he had nothing to gain. Daniel accepted the opportunities with grace, but never forgot the silence of those ramen noodle nights. With each job offer and handshake, he didn't feel like he was getting rich, he felt like he was being restored. His new life didn't look like his old one. No private jets or stock portfolios to brag about. Instead, he had meaningful work, genuine relationships, and income rooted in impact. But here's the real twist. Daniel didn't just return to wealth, he redefined it. He started a community fund that gave microloans to people in desperate moments, no interest, no red tape. He bought a small home, not a mansion, and filled it with books, plants, and laughter from neighbors who now called him the quiet guy with a huge heart. Wealth, he realized, wasn't measured in zeros or digits. It was measured in legacy, and how deeply your life touches someone else's. And Daniel? He was rich in every way that mattered. Daniel didn't become rich overnight. No lottery ticket, no hidden inheritance, no viral fame. What happened was far more powerful. People he had once lifted reached back. Slowly, steadily, almost quietly, the seeds he had planted began to bloom. Elijah wasn't the only one. A woman he had helped pay for night school years ago reached out to offer him a consulting role at her HR firm. Another man he once helped during an eviction crisis brought him into a real estate co-op project. None of them owed him anything, and yet they chose to return the kindness he gave when he had nothing to gain. Daniel accepted the opportunities with grace, but never forgot the silence of those ramen noodle nights. With each job offer and handshake, he didn't feel like he was getting rich, he felt like he was being restored. His new life didn't look like his old one. No private jets or stock portfolios to brag about. Instead, he had meaningful work, genuine relationships, and income rooted in impact. But here's the real twist. Daniel didn't just return to wealth, he redefined it. He started a community fund that gave microloans to people in desperate moments, no interest, no red tape. He bought a small home, not a mansion, and filled it with books, plants, and laughter from neighbors who now called him the quiet guy with a huge heart. Wealth, he realized, wasn't measured in zeros or digits. It was measured in legacy, and how deeply your life touches someone else's. And Daniel? He was rich in every way that mattered. Now I want to ask you something, and be honest with yourself. Would you ever give away everything you had? Not as a stunt, not for attention, but truly, from the heart. No guarantees it would come back. And if you did, what's the one thing you'd keep? Would it be your faith, your values, a memory, or just the hope that kindness still matters? If this story made you pause, even for a second, and think differently about wealth, purpose, or kindness, then do something small but powerful. Hit that subscribe button, because here at Whispered Wisdom, we don't just tell stories. We uncover the lessons buried inside them. the kind that whisper to you long after the screen fades to black. And who knows, maybe the next story is yours.